and get replaced with newer infrastructure, that's the right way to do it.
I mean, we would still have a small number of outlets or jacks that were networked in via a hardwire, just because there's some things that you do need to be more secure. And so there would be at least a port for the teacher to hook into, or the guidance department.
Exactly.
Because there's some sensitive things that you don't want out there on the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The other item that needs some attention in the school, I hate to say, is just the standard receptacles. You can probably talk to every teacher within the school, and they're going to say, boy, I wish we had a few more plugs in my classroom. And that goes without saying. I remember, kind of dating myself here, when we used to do classrooms, 2 receptacles, one at the front of the classroom and one at the back of the classroom. That no longer is applicable. There's way too many things that require electricity now. And this is a good example, as you can see, the number of plugs and extension cords and the rest of it that are running around a space like this. So that's something we would look at on a room-by-room basis, and we would upgrade that as part of the overall upgrade. That's included in the cost estimate that the cost estimator has put together is a new infrastructure for that. So it's basically what it amounts to: some reuse of good infrastructure that you have. There's certainly reuse of some conduits that are buried in some walls that are probably mechanically and electrically still sound that can be reused. Some of your lighting product that's still is still being used, and the example is the exit signs that have been recently replaced. Let's reuse those. And the rest of it, unfortunately, needs upgraded.
Yeah, I mean, there's one other system I think that we are making the assumptions that we can reuse part of, which is the telephone PA system.
Yes, exactly.
The handsets are old. Not all of them work. So the plan, I think, would be to replace those. That's relatively simple because it's kind of what you plug in at the end.
Exactly.
So there is some money in here, but it's not a total overhaul of that system. Now, you'll see when we get later on, we've got contingencies built into this, because upon further review, sometimes you find out that what you think you're going to save, you can't. And by the same token, there'll be some things we'll find that you can save that we were assuming we couldn't. So.
And the only other thing is, mechanically you're upgrading the school, so we would tag along with that electrically. So where the mechanical engineer has chosen new VAVs, new fan systems, anything that requires electricity as part of this overall upgrade, certainly the infrastructure would be, on the electrical side, would support all of those mechanical upgrades as well. And what we like to do is we like to separate those systems. If there's a large number of mechanical loads in the mechanical room, we would dedicate a panel for those mechanical loads. That makes really good sense from a distribution standpoint. And then anything that's noisy, that generates noise on the electrical system, we try to isolate those. In a middle school situation, we don't generally run into that very much, but all of the grounding would be brought up to code. We would have some surge suppression on the incoming service, so in case there was a switching surge or a lightning strike from the electric utility, that would get cut off or chopped off before it got into the school system. And new lighting on the exterior as well, as an upgrade.
Yeah, the good news on your exterior lighting is that you have almost no sight. I know
Exactly.
That's bad news in other ways, but you've got some lights out there along the street already. There's really no reason. I think one of them is actually an LED light, as I walked around and looked at it the other week. But we would, as part of the upgrade within the building, we would put some additional lights above doors and whatnot, and that would be all part of the building lighting system. It would just be on the outside of the building instead of on the inside.
And we're required by code to illuminate the path to the public way under an emergency situation. So say something was going on at night and the power failed, you have to give adequate egress lighting so people can get out, but you now have to, by code, extend that out to the public way, and that would essentially mean to the sidewalk. So not only would we place the emergency lights inside the building, but we would also augment those outside. And what we like to do is build those into the light fixtures that are being commonly used for the exterior lighting, kind of make it 2 for 1. I may open it up for...
The only one thing I'm not sure if you mentioned at the very beginning was any coordination with the public utility.
Green Mountain Power.
In terms of the idea is to relocate those transformers off of those poles.
Yeah, that's a horrible situation that those transformers have been there since, probably since the school was energized. The suggestion would be based on the size of service, is those would get replaced with a pad-mounted transformer, a very conventional green box transformer on the ground. It would be protected from damage, and that whole mess would be cleaned up there. There would be a single structure, single riser on a utility pole, high voltage cables through a conduit system to a transformer, and then from that transformer underground into the building. So that would clean up that whole corner there, and we try to tuck that out of the way and get rid of the pole top units. There is an opportunity to possibly save some monies, but the utilities generally, when you get up above a certain size service like 600 amps or 800 amps, they like to see you use a pad mount rather than pole top units, which is an alternative, and then having 3 cans on a pole similar to what you have now. But our recommendation, and I believe the utilities, would be to do a pad mount transformer outside to replace that.
And we've assumed that. You'll see that when we get to the cost estimate.
Any questions about the electrical? Yes.
I don't want to get ahead of us.
Yeah.
Right.
It says review off-peak electrical storage options.
Yeah, I think that I'd like to move into that.
But then there's another question I wanted
Sure.
to ask. What happens with some towns, they designate schools as emergency shelters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, thinking along that line, if, just say the town cooperated with us.
Right.
And designated this as an emergency shelter, wouldn't we be open possibly some grants from like Homeland Security?
It is possible, and I know that's been the program in the past. I don't know the current availability of that, but there have been schools that have received grants for the purchase of generators to that end. It's usually limited, I think, to the purchase of that generator, and sometimes, to the hookup of that generator. Or I know schools that have not purchased the generator, but have put in a service that allows you to bring in a portable generator and set it down on a flatbed or something and essentially
And
plug
then
it
you'd
in.
end up wiring, or you'd end up having enough power available that way to essentially power up the entire building.
The Red Cross involved with that emergency designation?
Yes, it's usually a regional decision about where you want to locate that. Frequently, the local high school tends to be the largest building
Right.
in a particular region, depending on, especially in the more rural areas of the state.
Well, I know a couple of our real small schools
Exactly.
are actually emergencies, so.
I know when we looked at the Hanover High School as an opportunity for Hanover, for it to become, we were in it, and I think some of it had to do from the age of the existing structure and what had to be done structurally to bring it up to a much higher level of, call it earthquake resistance, and that's not the right terminology. I'm getting mixed up here, and I only heard part of that story. But I know by the time they got said and done and looking into all of the requirements and following all the guidelines and all the codes, it ended up being very costly, and they said, we have already got a shelter, it's somewhere else, we don't want to do this. It's just going to be too cumbersome, and it's going to be a burden on the taxpayer and a burden on the community to bring it to the right level.
I mean, that's something to certainly investigate locally here, and we could look into that.
Yeah.
I was just trying to save some money,
I
No,
understand.
it's
Get a grant from somebody.
Absolutely.
As with a lot of things, you save money on one end and you have to,
Yeah.
there's expenses elsewhere to provide that
I think the town
service.
hall here too is one of the designated shelters, and it's right over the hill.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean,
The women's club area is a emergency
Yeah, I mean, amazingly, this is not one of the more rural areas of the state compared to a lot of other places.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned control panels, different things. In terms of the overall ongoing management of the electrical system post renovation,
Okay.
the lighting system, etc. Would there be a designated computer or something whereby we would, the maintenance department could basically control that?
There's a number of ways to do that. Quite often, the building management system that's being proposed by the mechanical engineer, we integrate those controls right into their system, so it's only one system that he has to get familiar with. And the controls for the lighting can certainly be augmented to the building management system that you're probably going to end up with anyway.
So we will be looking at it.
We will look at that, and that would be a future discussion, because there's obviously, it's one of those things that sounds great right off, but then you need to really stop and think about whether you want the lights going on and off by a motion sensor or not.
Or a time sensitive, or by occupancy.
Or
and
the CO2 monitor.
Exactly.
Because one person may not provide enough presence in the room to keep the lights on, and yet that one person needs the lights on. Just like a group of this size. So you have to be careful of what you get. But there are certainly a lot of options in there. Obviously, occupancy sensors are actually pretty good. That if somebody leaves and doesn't turn off the lights, after a certain amount of time and there's been no movement in the room, the lights will go off on their own.
There are some difficulties in my experience over the years. We did many years ago a project where we had a number of fluorescent lights in some picking aisles. So we had all of these aisles, and there's people in and out, in and out, in and out. We thought, wow, what a great idea. We've got this string of fluorescents. Let's put them on a motion sensor. This is going to work great because some of the aisles are very active, some of them aren't. And we're going to save the owner all kinds of money. About a year goes by, and Bob gets a call, and it's like, boy, why are my lamps burning out so quickly? I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, because they're cycling so frequently, the fluorescent lamps, and they haven't fixed this yet, they want to stay on and they want to run for a 6, 8, 12-hour day. They don't want to be turned on and off, on and off, on and off. And they were replacing these 24,000 plus hour lamps in less than 6 months because, and it was horrible. And I said, well, what do you have the occupancy sensor set at? And he said, 10 seconds. So it's like, for Pete's sake, it's 10 seconds. You need to crank those babies up to 12 minutes or something, pay for a little bit of electricity. Right. But, and that was a really good lessons learned where you're using an example of a particular technology that sounds great, works great, worked fine. Everybody was so happy with it. Right. But they were replacing a lot of lamps in a very short order.
And one other quick story on that end, and then we probably should move on to the next topic. But we had it so that the lights were coming on and off on a motion sensor in one classroom, and it was an art room. And the teacher then had taken from the ceiling grid and hung a bunch of kind of mobiles and stuff. And when the fan would come on the heating unit, it would blow the air, and these things would wave in the wind, and it would turn the lights on. There was nobody in the room.
Quick question. Auditorium and stage lighting, was that within the scope of this research as well, or no?
No. I mean, we can look at the house lights in the auditorium, certainly as part of the square footage of this building, and finding the most energy efficient way to do that when you want to bring that up, when you're using that in essence as a classroom type of space. The theatrical lighting is a totally different thing. It's at this point almost impossible to bring that into the energy efficiency discussion. Right. Efficiency Vermont doesn't want to talk about it because they recognize that these are high intensity lamps that use a lot of power.
And you can spend a little or you can spend a lot for those systems.
We can look at whether you want to add an extra bar there to clamp those lights onto, and that's certainly within the margin of error of the estimate that we have right now. Yeah. So, Bob, I know you did a little research on the question that I brought to you from this group about whether with the hydro potential hydro capacity that's right here in Bellows Falls, as to whether that could be somehow diverted into providing an inexpensive, cost-effective source of electrical power for this building.
Absolutely, and